Okay, so this is lecture number 7, happening in week 8. So if you're watching this during reading week, don't. This is for week. Oh, I mean, you can if you want. It's fluid. But this is the second part in our 2-part series of party organisations. And another reminder that the models and ideas here are all ideal types, in a sense that nobody is claiming that parties do meet all the criteria set out fully, or that they don't also draw upon other models as well. So real-world parties will be on a spectrum between different party types. So in this lecture, we'll be looking at business firm parties, we'll be looking at cyber parties, and then we'll be looking at pirate parties. Pirate parties being a kind of, a type of cyber party, or what we might call a platform party, a type of cyber party that has a consistent ideology from country to country. So we can think of cyber parties as being a mode of organisation, and pirate parties that combine that particular mode of organisation, of party organisation, with a specific and consistent ideology. And we'll also be looking, or throughout anyway, we'll be looking at the extent to which digital parties represent a revolution or evolution in party organisation. That will form one of the seminar questions, so I want you to really think about that. To what extent does the cyber party model challenge what we understand as a political party, and how might we measure that? How might we compare that? As Hopkin and Paolucci note, political parties which lack the organisational inertia, which comes with a long history, are particularly susceptible to changing forms of party competition. One of the new forms that these parties might change into is the business firm party. Now, there are 2 types of business firm party identified in the literature. One is based on an already existing commercial company whose structures are then used for a political project. So, for example, Hopkin and Paolucci note Berlusconi's Forza Italia in Italy as an example of the first type. In Forza Italia, they say, the distinctions between analogy and reality are blurred. The political entrepreneur in question is in fact a businessman, and the organisation of the party is largely conditioned by the prior existence of a business firm. The second type is a new and separate organisation which is specially constituted or constructed for a political endeavour. So set up from nothing, but in the structure of a business rather than a political party as we might understand this. So for example, a mass party or a catch-all party. For Crowell, these types of parties originate from the private initiative of a political entrepreneur and have by and large the structures of a commercial company. It is argued that business firm parties emerge as cartel parties. As cartel parties slowly monopolise the resources of the state and create a legal environment that favours incumbent parties and discriminates against new competitors, as a result of this exclusion, political entrepreneurs who have no access to the resources of the state use the resources and strategies of the private sector, particularly the commercial mass media, to gain access to the electoral arena and to executive power. However, other people argue that business firm parties either emerge in times of political crises. So, for example, when one party system fails, and that's a party system failing, such as France at the end of its 40s or 50s, and Italy in the 90s. These business firm parties allow individual entrepreneurs to step into or give them a chance to win office without having to rely on a full party organisation. And the literature argues they're more common in areas with less institutionalised party systems. The business firm model is attractive because traditional forms of party organisation, large memberships, nationwide structures, branches, internal democracy, have large upfront costs in replicating, so new parties or new political entrepreneurs are not incentivised to match them. In terms of organisation, the business firm party generates its resources from the private sector, which differentiates it from cartel parties who generate their resources from the state for activities, or mass parties which rely on their membership to generate resources. And resources doesn't just mean money, it can also mean things like policy ideas and personnel. So although business firm parties might have financial support from interest groups, for example, maybe business groups, such groups are not the main source of income or their main source of electoral support or their main channel of communication with the general public. In the words of Hopkins and Paolucci then, business firm parties will own a lightweight organisation with the sole basic function of mobilising mobilising support at election time. So generally, the extra parliamentary party is practically useless, will not be developed on any meaningful scale. What might be developed is a mechanism for mobilising sympathisers or party supporters at party conferences to provide an image to the public of a vibrant party, but these members will not have any meaningful power. In fact, these parties don't need memberships or members at all, because the mass media does away with the need for door-to-door campaigning. You can campaign through the newspapers, through television and through social media. The firm provides money for the party to spend. Policy formation comes from focus groups and opinion polls, which can be bought with finances, and party workers, such as leafleters, volunteers, members, whatever, they could come from within the firm itself. People can be paid to deliver leaflets and things like that. The essence of the business firm party is that all party activities and tasks are brought under formal commercial contract in the terms of labour, services and goods to be delivered to the party. So this means that only the individuals that have a more prominent stake in the party are the ones that occupy the party in public office. And we can think of the party as organisation as being kind of almost privatised in a sense. Business firm parties will have a flexible ideological orientation and an eagerness to attract superficial support from broad sectors of society, but unlike the catch-all party, they are not oriented towards interest groups for their policy ideas. Also, mass and catch-all parties are nominally constrained by ideological position and the views of their members in a way that business firm parties are not. So policy positions within business firm parties will be developed as products would be within a firm. They're orientated towards demand on the basis of market research, with focus groups, surveys, local trials to test their feasibility and their popularity. These policy products then need to be wrapped in the most attractive package and will aggressively be put into the market, advertised by political entrepreneurs in the same way that maybe celebrities would advertise products. The business firm ideal of a lightweight organisation with the sole basic function of mobilising short-term support at election time without a deeper political or class-based loyalty means that the ability for members to use their voice within the party is restricted. They can't vote on issues, they can't select potential representatives or censor them, things like that. So the use of voice is severely limited, and the cost of exiting the party, i.e. no longer supporting it, is much lower than with traditional parties, because traditional parties you are giving up on a lot more, such as the ability to choose candidates. When policies are unpopular and election losses occur, it is in the nature of the business firm model that a greater proportion of the party's electorate will be sufficiently mobile, in the absence of strong party identification, to exercise the exit option than would be the case in a mass bureaucratic party or a catch-all party, which makes short-term political failures potentially fatal to the party's hopes of survival. Whilst the responsiveness of older institutionalised parties to their electors should not be exaggerated, difficulties in establishing a core electorate early in a party's stronghold are recognised for the business firm party. So a classic example of the business firm party is Forza Italia under Berlusconi. The case of Forza Italia is it's illuminating. It's the most egregious and extreme version of a business party you might find, and it probably is one of the closest to the ideal types. Unlike cartel parties, where leaders are professional politicians who seek perpetual employment, business firm parties enter politics in order to protect or develop existing state benefits. So in the case of Berlusconi, it was to protect his monopoly position in the media after a series of corruption scandals rocked the Italian political establishment. The structure of the party was centralised power in the office of the leader, who had power over candidates, policy, direction, weak, unrepresentative membership organisations, structured like a business. So, for example, as Hodkin and Paolucci note, several of the Fininvest, which is the original business firm organisation that Berlusconi came from, they made loans to the party in the way of resources, of personnel, and they form the backbone of an extremely centralised, non-bureaucratic, slim organisation. Policy was also directly developed from market soundings, opinion polls, rather than ideology, or to even reflect the beliefs of party elites. There's been other examples, though, of business firm parties. I would say it's well worth reading that article from Hopkin and POLI239, because it really does give you a good overview of what's going on there. But there are other examples. So the Czech Republic has provided 2 examples of business firm parties: Public Affairs, VV, and Action of Dissatisfied Citizens 2011, or Anno 2011. Like at the end of the 2000s, Czech Republic, as in the decade of 2000 to 2010, rather than the end of 2000s, because they're not in the future. The Czech Republic experienced a crisis of party politics. Established political parties saw the erosion of their electoral support and decline in their membership, alongside a loss of institutions, a loss of trust in institutions, including political parties and democracy in general, caused by things like corruption scandals. Both Public Affairs and Anno 2011 took advantage of public discontent with existing political circumstances, especially targeting the performance of political elites and the established parties. Their campaigns, therefore, invoked an anti-establishment and protest rhetoric, which criticised the current political establishment and stressed the need to fight the corruption that apparently directly affected existing political elites. These organisations could make this argument with conviction because they were new political actors with new projects that offered an alternative to established political parties and those parties' past practices. They were also innovative when it came to the use of modern communication technologies such as Facebook, making a significant difference compared to established political parties. But despite similar party organisations, these 2 parties had different fates. The leader of Anno was Deputy Prime Minister from 2014 to 17 and is now the Prime Minister, whilst Public Affairs is no longer an existing political party, following an internal party split over, ironically enough, corruption scandals. So why the difference? Well, it's worth reading the article to begin with, but it's also worth noting that while Public Affairs originated as a small local political party, which was later taken over by political entrepreneurs who made it a nationwide party, Anno 2011 actually began as a political project of an established political entrepreneur, Andrej Babiš. Public Affairs was never officially led by a charismatic and strong personality, despite the presence of a political entrepreneur who was kept in the background until it was too late and the party was already in trouble. In contrast, Babiš has been a strong leader from the beginning. He not only drives the party from behind the scenes, but is also its official chairman and its main face to the outside world. Anno 2011 has been more successful in maintaining efficient and professional communications, and it's helped by favourable coverage from being from Babiš's own media, particularly in combating the political opposition. Similarly, despite being part of a coalition government, Anno continues the language of being a political outsider, so rhetorically it uses this populist frame, which boosts their own support and reduces the ability of the opposition to capitalise on attacking the government themselves, because Anno separates itself from the government. There's also a strong hint of optimism. So Anno's slogan is, "Yes, it will get better." The movement also has a high degree of discipline amongst its representatives in Parliament, which is another issue that Public Affairs struggle with. But what we will note is that for a party which has nearly half of the seats in the lower house, its membership in 2020 was only 3,100, aiming to be a mass party. And it shows you don't need to be a mass party in order to be electorally successful. There are obviously huge disadvantages and risks to the business firm party model. As parties lack strong, resilient and coherent voter bases, party competition becomes more volatile and parties can come and go very quickly. This does not allow for a stable party system, and it doesn't allow for much public faith in the political system itself if it seems to be unstable for a long period of time. Traditionally, mass parties are sticky in their support insofar as they're not simply defeated when they lose an election. So, for example, Labour after 1951 have been long periods of opposition because they base their institutional solidity or their stickiness on having roots within civil society, on having robust internal structures that don't rely on having people in public office in order to keep them loyal to the party, and alongside a body of party members with vested interests in the party's survival. And this creates what we call an electorate of belonging, according to Payne Bianco, a coherent social base which the party privileges in its political discourse and in its policy formation in return for receiving a stable supply of electoral support. So, for example, first, in contrast, business firms do not enjoy this support. They have minimal party bureaucracy, e.g. branch parties, and a limited grassroots membership. So administration, campaigning, etc. is often contracted out to private companies. This means there are fewer loyal voters, and thus a large defeat can be catastrophic and fatal for the party, meaning the party system as a whole is subject to sudden radical change, which can destabilise democratic politics and also coalition formation. Especially if you don't know, if you can't assume in advance what a business firm party's ideology is going to be over the next few years, then you don't know if you want them in your coalition or not. Similarly, a lack of party loyalty can reduce voter buy-in to the political system and reduce support for the political system as a whole, especially if parties are seen as cynical voter mobilisation organisations rather than representing meaningful sociological groupings in society. Building on this, the fact that policy making is concentrated in the centre of the party, especially within the leader or the leader's office, means that the party can perform sudden U-turns if opinion polls or market research suggest this might be a good idea, even if those who voted for the party disagree. This is bad for trust in politics and the broader political system, and might be a poor strategy if voters do not reward parties that keep making U-turns. Unhelpfully, business firm parties can arise much more easily in places where they can do much damage, i.e. poorly institutionalised party systems where democracy is emerging and where stability and trust in the political system are most needed. And business firm parties are at a greater risk because if they lose an election, whereas in the UK, for example, if Labour lost an election, it would have the trade unions to fall back on. It would also have a large membership who wouldn't necessarily leave the party overnight. Whereas if a political party like Forza Italia loses an election, then if it seems like they can't come back, there's no loyalty to that party, and voters might go to other parties that are close to what they believe in, even if they're not fit, the say Forza Italia might have been. So here is a table. It's quite big. So overall, it's important to note that the type of party structure used has real-world consequences in both how politics is done and the role of representatives in the legislature. As with most things, there's no single right way. Right? There's no right way to organise a political party. The reasons an organisation is chosen is influenced by a range of factors, including parties that already exist in the party system, relationships with other parties within and without the country, the individual personalities of party leaders, and perhaps the ideology of the political entrepreneurs, the structure of society, the social, political and economic context, the likelihood of individuals joining parties, when the party was formed, so on. Furthermore, although the consequences of business firm parties or of the party types we've explored so far may sound extreme, they're based on the logics of parties being purely these ideal types, as I've said lots of times now. As noted, no party fits any of these perfectly. Even a new business firm party might attract parliamentarians from other parties, for example, which implicitly gives the party an ideological hue in the eyes of the voters, or might keep a business firm party, say, on the right, if it attracts lots of like, for example, say Nigel Farage set up a new business firm party and he attracted loads of kind of right-wing Tories and UKIP supporters, right? Then we would see, or in the eyes of the voters and also in the eyes of Farage's like parliamentarians, that party, that business firm party, having a right-wing outlook on life, right? And then if Farage then tried to bring in socialism in one country, those parliamentarians would rebel, and there'd be party management issues. And so even though in theory the Business Firm Party is meant to be ideologically flexible, in reality in this case that might not be possible. That's just a hypothetical example, obviously. So here is just overviews from Crowell. There's a link, a hyperlink in the title, so you can check that out. It's also worth using this to compare and contrast different party organisations, just so you know where you stand. And if you get bored in lockdown, what you could do, you could print this off, keep the column headers and the row headers, cut out each one of the different descriptions in each grid, mash them all up, and then try and put them back in place like a jigsaw. That is something you could do in lockdown if you wanted, but it's not necessary. So we've covered the traditional or mainstream forms of party organisation. The next type we're going to look at is the cyber party. The best and most successful example of this is the Five Star Movement in Italy, but there are also other types, such as the Pirate Party family. Podemos in Spain is also given an example. The logical underpinning of the cyber party is that in the same way so much social interaction moves online, there's a pressure for political parties to do the same. Political parties are competing with interest groups and social movements, both of which are well versed in using the internet for campaigning purposes, whereas political parties lag. Indeed, early predictions that internet usage would reinforce the dominance of larger, better resourced parties in Europe have been kind of disproven to some extent, because it's actually been smaller parties which have used the internet more effectively, often out of necessity, since traditional parties dominate the media's attention. Now, one word of warning, one of the key readings here by Margits is about 15 years old now, so you need to make sure that you yourself do more research, and I've included a few more up-to-date sources. So what might be the defining characteristics of a cyber party? So the key defining features is that cyber parties use web-based technologies to strengthen the relationship between voters and parties, rather than traditional notions of party membership. So partly, it's not just about to be a cyber party, or what we'll see later as a platform party. It's not about just a normal party using, a good website, maybe even an app, right? It's about how political parties, organisational structure, and placing the web or placing the internet at the core of that party organisation or that structure. But there are issues, so issues of funding and campaigning, for example. Membership dues have traditionally been a regular and uncontroversial source of income for political parties, that members are needed for campaigning, especially if parties lack the private resources of business firm parties. However, in the case of the UK, we can see how Labour's opening up of membership to the masses through their registered supporters scheme, lowering the price to £3, and the use of social media by Jeremy Corbyn drastically changed the political landscape. However, this is an example of an established party using the internet effectively, rather than changing itself to be a new type of party organisation. The Labour Party became much more effective at memes and galvanising members, but it didn't change its fundamental structure of local branches, conference delegates and all that. For cyber parties, the internet offers potentials for new forms of internal organisation beyond just presenting an image or front end to the public. And the internet could also be used to link up local or sectoral units of decentralised parties, and could be used to good effect in making coalition arrangements intelligible to the electorate, i.e. providing much more information to the electorate through much more varied forms than was perhaps the case. Paolo Gabaldo uses the term platform party to explain a party type which adopts digital technology as a key means of communication and organisation, rather than as an add-on or supplement to traditional methods of communication. As he notes, Platform parties, what he calls platform parties, pursue a far-reaching restructuring of their organisational forms and their philosophies in ways which are coherent with the nature of a digital society and its drive towards directness, disintermediation, interactivity, adaptability, and instantaneous responsiveness, instead of simply using digital technology in a purely instrumental sense as a way to achieve specific ends, whilst otherwise maintaining the organisational forms and dynamics of the past. And perhaps the best example so far of cyber party is the 5-Star Movement in Italy. So this was set up by a former comedian and showman, Beppe Grillo, who started a grassroots movement in 2010 called 5-Star Movement, based on angry political blogs that he wrote, addressing the concerns of dissatisfied Italians and the young in the country. He's used social media to communicate, recruit and organise, growing the 5-Star Movement from practically nothing to a major political force in Italy in about 3 years. And now, the 5-Star Movement is in Italy's coalition government. Now, the 5-Star Movement's an interesting one. It's populist, it's Eurosceptic, it's anti-establishment, and it supports direct and e-democracy, as well as anti-globalisation. At the core of the 5-Star Movement ideology is that conventional representative democracy and the conventional political party are outdated methods of organising political life. And this is combined with a hostility towards To combat careerism, representative democracy should be combined with components of direct democracy. And this ties in with 5-Star's populist approach to politics. Its objective is to include a transformation in the relationship between politics and society, so as to eliminate all forms of structured mediation between the two, including the political. To that end, 5-Star Movement maintains that during their limited terms, elected officials must not behave as individuals, but rather express and execute the uniform will of a community, typically 5-Star Movement members. The party doesn't see the world in terms of class, of left or right, but rather of a kind of class, not class conflict, group conflict between those who produce wealth and social services and the parasite class. This battle against the castes, as they call it, is the true political battle. And this includes trade unions. So the current 5-Star leader and Deputy Prime Minister of Italy wrote, "The parties and unions share the same fate. The unions share the same fate. The era of representation is over. Everyone has to get his helmet and start to represent himself." And this is really only possible with the internet, right? This Athenian idea that all citizens should take part in making decisions. And the movement for capitalism and the internet as essential to solving the problems of contemporary democracies and societies. So in 2012, the party chose its Italian and European parliamentary candidates through online voting by registered members of Beppe Grillo's blog. It now uses an application called, fittingly enough, Rousseau, and the registered users of the 5-Star Movement discuss, approve or reject legislative proposals submitted then in the Parliament by the 5-Star Movement group. So the 5-Star Movement's electoral law, for example, was shaped through a series of online votes. The 5-Star Movement candidate for president, the choice to support the abolition of a law against immigrants, which is of the leader Beppe Grillo, as was the partnership with UKIP in the European Parliament, and a decision to go into the coalition with Lega Nord and then with the Christian Democratic Party. All of these were given over to the membership. The 5-Star Movement Constitution, called the Non-Statute, explicitly states that the movement is not a party and it does not want to become one in the future. Online participation, or cyber activism, is the main tool for giving a voice to citizens. So Grillo has repeatedly said that the 5-Star Movement is a leaderless organisation. The absence of intermediaries between the people and the movement is intended to strengthen his perception. Nonetheless, there is a criticism that the movement is a strict top-down organisation based on the preeminence of Beppe Grillo, and this might tie back into the iron law of oligarchy from Michels that we spoke about last week. However, unlike the decentralised pirate parties that we'll look at in a minute, within the party itself, the right to use 5-Star logos is decided by the central leadership. The power to grant or refuse, maintain or withdraw political and electoral use of this symbol by local groups is concentrated in the hands of the leader, who therefore has the faculty to expel from the movement militants and elected members who are not to his liking. Some policies have always been directed by the leadership as well, so the party being anti-Euro. So what we get is a very imperfect method of organising a political party where there is a mechanism to give members power, but it's not always as idyllic as perhaps the theory suggests. For Hartleb, the cyber party type is becoming more and more dominant because of the role of social media. Through flexible multi-channel political communication, so parties have a lot more pathways to voters, and new platforms such as Twitter allow for a more flexible and diverse communication. The 24-hour news cycle and cheaper campaigning as well all play a role. Whereas traditional parties can adapt to new online technologies and ways of doing politics, other parties are born out of the disruption of the internet age. A key example being the Pirate Party family type. These have sprung up across Europe, Australia, Latin America, Africa. They've been most successful in Sweden, the Czech Republic, Iceland, Germany, although sadly the UK's Pirate Party voted to dissolve itself in 2020. Now, some like Gabaudo class the pirate parties as digital or platform parties, alongside Podemos in Spain, Five Star Movement in Italy, La France Insoumise in France, and Momentum in the UK, for instance. It's worth considering pirate parties separately from these other forms of platform parties or movements in the case of Momentum, because pirate parties not only take this form of digital or platform party organisation, they combine it with a consistent ideology across countries. So we're talking about a party family here. Pirate parties place themselves on a specific cleavage. As we said in week 3, a political division must incorporate 3 distinct elements to be defined as a cleavage. An empirical element that can be defined in socio-structural terms, i.e. an objective group. A normative element that provides a sense and role, i.e. people must see themselves as part of that group. And an organisational or behavioural element, so a set of interactions, institutions and organisations that develop as part of the cleavage. Demke argues that the National Revolution involved power over territory and the organisation of the polity. The Industrial Revolution involved power over capital and the organisation of material production, i.e. workers' owners. Likewise, what we can call a communicational revolution can be said to involve a struggle for power over words and the organisation of knowledge production, and thus has produced a new knowledge-based cleavage. Now, the Asian Revolution and the change in beliefs that engenders about knowledge and the production of knowledge have given rise to at least 2 new politically relevant cleavages: knowledge-based cleavage and the transnational network and the nation-state cleavage. Now, the conflict is structured over the content of knowledge, the right to knowledge and the primacy of knowledge, and it's expected to take the form of a conflict over whether knowledge should be a profitable capitalist commodity, or knowledge should be understood in an intellectual sense, which is free for sharing and to be circulated, i.e. in a way that will benefit the kind of sum of human knowledge. Over the right to knowledge is a fight for information to be free, for knowledge and intellectual efforts to be shared between social classes and between cultures. And the issue is often one of intellectual property rights or of control over the flow of information on the internet. Now, it's not a surprise that pirate parties emerged from groups who want to reform copyright restrictions over pirating music illegally, but has kind of expanded into a much more noble free pursuit of knowledge. The transnational network / nation state cleavage is emerging because the power of the nation state is based on control over territory. The communicational revolution thus entails a weakening of the power of the nation state in terms of diminished sovereignty, autonomy and relevance really in the 21st century. The communicational revolution creates and reinforces international networks that have no territorial base and are usually held together by knowledge, skills and values of network members. The struggle also revolves around interpretive primacy with respect to international laws, religious issues and moral issues. It's along these new politically relevant cleavages, specifically the knowledge-based cleavage, that the Pirate Party is mobilising voters. As Ravelli notes, the mass party incarnated the logic of production of the industrial society, i.e. the mass party organisation, reflected how capitalist society was organised at the time in the private sphere and brought that into the party political sphere. And to that extent, so do pirate parties. For Gerbaum, parties represent the type of party organisational structure which has emerged out of the new socio-economic context of the internet, what he terms the network society. Platform parties are not class-based parties. They're not overly ideological, nor do they have a messianic view of how the world should be. Instead, they have a preference for issues that are felt to be concrete and immediate, arising from voters' or at least participants' preference for polling members and getting their immediate views and issues on these challenges. As Otage finds, primarily, pirate parties draw support from younger voters who grew up using the internet and are thus who are politically socialised within the context of these networks, of these internet networks. They also tend to have higher levels of political distrust and hold cyber libertarian values and are generally not on the extreme left or right. They tend to be centrist. Policy-wise, pirate parties broadly endorse support for civil rights, direct democracy, e-democracy, participation in government, reform of copyright law and patent law, free sharing of knowledge, information privacy, transparency, freedom of information, free speech, anti-corruption, and net neutrality. The difference between pirate parties and the Green parties, and in the European Parliament, for example, pirate parties party group, is the emphasis placed on individual rights. Green parties have always promoted liberal values of individuality, but their main focus has been on collective gains for classes and the means to save the planet. Pirate parties are very good examples, though, of cyber parties and can be characterised as groups that claim we have entered a new age of digital politics that includes greater transparency in the political decision-making process. Pirate parties seek to provide a new conceptual framework for understanding the virtual world. The pirate party themselves as not having an ideology to which all of its members should subscribe, as in order to say instead, look, what we do is we go like the 5-star movement, we can speak to our voters and we can get almost the will of the people. Whereas in reality, it can actually be regarded as an alternative left party. At least in some cases, it's seen as on the libertarian left, but that's not necessarily always the case. And it holds that by means of new technology, citizens should continually participate in politics and stand against the hierarchies of the mainstream parties. It claims to embody the ideal of a party without any leadership. Board exists, and its existence has caused struggles between followers and leaders. The party has high ambitions concerning input, for example, party congresses, and it places a large emphasis on individuals getting involved. The pirate party family is typically participatory and democratic. In many countries, there are no rules on being a member of another political party at the same time, for example. But research by Bollier et al. Find that in the case of the German and Swedish pirate parties, they've experienced negative consequences, including weak member commitment as a result of their attempts to be overly open and overly inclusive. Due to the low barriers of entry to membership, the obligation on members is also low, and this results in lower levels of offline activity. So, for example, collecting signatures to allow candidates to stand, for example. Lower levels of online participation, and thus membership in this case is not the same as actual membership for traditional parties, where the obligations are higher. Similarly, the sub-national branches has also led to infighting within pirate parties themselves. Digital parties have pursued the idea of using the power of the internet to boost member or citizen involvement in politics for a long time, especially pirate parties, which since their inception have called for the creation of new forms of political participation adequate to the digital condition. A good example as well is the creation of liquid feedback, which was a decision-making system by Public Software Group in Berlin, which allows users to vote directly on issues or delegate decisions within given policy areas to people they trust. This was used, for example, by the German Pirate Party. However, academics such as Paolo stress that digital parties do not necessarily increase or transform intra-party democracy through the adoption of online participatory platforms. It still relies on individuals to want to be involved, to have the knowledge, to vote on things, to have the drive, and to not be distracted by other forms of politics, such as protest movements or other interests in life. The 5-star movement has presented itself as a party of the web and has made digital democracy a key element of its identity. However, it has seen massive increases in popularity followed by massive decreases in popularity, like all political parties when it has to make difficult decisions. Although it has held online primaries called to select candidates for parliamentary elections, as mentioned before, alongside internal referendums, discussions on policy, and yet it still seems to face the same issues as other political parties, especially when elites need to make decisions quickly. This doesn't seem to be the kind of instant reaction, and even if it was, it is not necessarily clear why party elected representatives should be bound by a snap judgment of party members in terms of what they should do in office, especially in times of a crisis or a fast-moving issue. If you are going to ask a handful of the public, i.e. your own party members, via an online platform, why not just poll the population as a whole? Surely that would be more democratic, and it's completely within the bounds of government or a political party to do that. So whilst digital parties have introduced various participatory innovations, the actual room for bottom-up qualitative intervention from members is seriously limited for a range of reasons. Indeed, Gabaudo argues that digital parties' IPD is centralised with a low degree of institutionalisation of rules and procedures and of inclusiveness. And so, although members do have power to elect leaders, once a leader is elected, they hold him over the party. The ushering in of participatory platforms has led to a strong centralisation of decision-making. Within digital parties, major decisions are centralised to two ends: in the online assembly of all members and in the leadership, which controls the calling and timing of and consultations involving members. This centralisation weakens local organisational units, such as sections, branches and cells, which are often important in mass party organisational structures. It can be described as a reactive democracy, to express its similarity with the shallowness social media reactions, for example on BuzzFeed back in the day, where you had like, wow, haha. If you're voting on an issue, you don't need to be giving it that much attention. It can be as superficial as liking a tweet on Facebook. Members' participation mostly takes the form of ratification, a binary for or against, or like or unlike, reaction to proposals that have largely been pre-packaged by the leadership. And the party leadership and the staff at its direct dependency retain firm control over the process, and online consultations have rarely yielded results contrary to the leader's wishes. Hence, for Gabaudo, it's therefore doubtful whether these parties are more democratic than traditional political parties at all. The internet is not a panacea. So over the last 2 weeks, we've looked at various forms of political party organisation. One key theme I want you to really focus on is the role of socio-economic and technological context in shaping the type of parties which emerge. And does this mean that these parties cannot survive outside this context? Or can parties learn from each other and so develop perhaps what we call leapfrog in innovation studies? So, for example, in a country where the internet is not as institutionalized, can you still get some form of cyber party because it learns and draws from knowledge gained in other contexts, for example? I'd also like you to think about whether different political party types or organisations address different needs in society, and whether some are better than others at meeting what it is we think parties do in democratic systems. So the things we spoke about in the first week's lectures. Are some parties better than others at some things?